Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and Ninja Storm is a strange season, not because the season itself is all that strange, although tonally it is quite different by Ranger standards, but because while many seem to favor it, it doesn't really get talked about all that much. There are a couple of you that swear by this season, but for the most part, it just seems to exist in a permanent state of, yeah, it's good, without much discussion as to the hows and the whys. And as all of you know, those are my favorite questions to answer. So, with all that said, let's dig into Ninja Storm and why I think its unique tone both hinders and helps foster its overall quality. We'll start things off with a little bit of background discussion. As most of you know, Ninja Storm was the second season under the Disney era, but getting it off the ground proved financially complicated. Disney, however, found a way around those complications because of that mystical, far-off land that seems to draw both ire and admiration from the fanbase. Good old cost-effective New Zealand. And while the scenery change had its downsides, I'd say the overall venture did considerably more right than wrong, especially with Doug Sloan and Ann Austin in charge of the first 2 years of that transition, and if nothing else, the way they led this season and Dino Thunder proved that they care about this franchise. In any case, Ninja Storm was touted as bringing back the lighthearted tone that defined the earliest days of Rangers, and that worked, up to a point. And now that we've set the table a bit, let's take a deeper look at the series itself, and we'll start where we always do, at the beginning. Prelude to a Storm introduces us to extreme sports, as well as the initial trio of Rangers for the season. The one thing that you'll notice about this season almost immediately is how laid back things are. These three Rangers, chosen above the others, are also the Rangers that manage to be late for every training. So, eventually, Lothor, our big bad for the season, begins his attack by coming back to the Wind Ninja Academy, which, as we later learn, he used to be a part of. He steals away all the trainees, as well as turning Sensei into Guinea Pig Sensei, because ninja magic? It's completely absurd, but I'm pretty sure the show knows that too, and I think that's why they did it. Although it does have the consequence of not being able to take our resident ninja master as seriously, but more on him and his mentorship later. Here's another thing that was really good about the season opener. They already established that these three are not the most timely people, save Tori, but this time around, the reason they were late was doing a good deed instead of just their usual faffing around for too long. I like the congruity of that situation, because it's the future Rangers doing good while their main nemesis is doing bad. And I think it means that much more that this is what kept them from being captured as directly opposed to their initial tardiness. But when they finally make it, it's a pretty rough scene. For a season that has already established that it's not taking itself as seriously as something like Time Force, seeing your entire academy and all of your allies getting swallowed up is a pretty big moment for a first episode. But at the same time, it really didn't have any emotional weight to it because all of the other ninjas were 5-second cameos with no real presence or connection to the main three. It gets hard to really analyze scenes like that, because for that reason, it doesn't really work as intended. But at the same time, this season's intentions are a little different. Eventually, the trio finds Cam and Sensei, and they receive their brand new Wind Morphers. Ninja Storm is so hell-bent on reminding you of a more relaxed time that they even fight their first monster, where else, but in an abandoned quarry. There's a lot going on in the first 22 minutes of Ninja Storm, but this scene, this one right here, oh, it's pretty perfect. Not just as a hilarious joke, but as a clever dose of self-parody. It's Ninja Storm asking, hey, how come almost every Ranger before us seemed to automatically know how to morph without ever being shown the sequence? So, this season finally makes a joke about that. What's more, the comic book nerd, the one guy that always believed the Rangers were real, is the one doing the teaching this time. Not that Rangers being only comic book heroes makes any sense within the continuity, but they do team up with Dino Thunder later, so at least it's the characters themselves being uninformed, as opposed to the show itself forgetting about itself. Even still, it always feels a bit uncouth when Rangers tries to downplay the existence of their heritage. But in any case, it's an amazing moment that even gets Cam involved early as the at times disgruntled tech expert that he is. This, more so than any other moment, really captures the initial spirit of what Ninja Storm is going for. So the Rangers win the battle, of course, but as we know, the real battle has only just begun. There's No I in Team is an important second episode for exactly the reason the title implies. Shane leads the team now. So he has to learn what that entails, especially since early on he suffers from that same standalone complex that defines several lesser rangers. Thankfully, Shane's simple yet effective overall development has more in common with Jack than Jaden, and it also gives a bit of early shine to Kelly, a sole example of a hard-working but often overlooked backbone of the season type of character that defined a good chunk of this era. So, Shane faces a monster alone, but is getting his butt kicked because episode title. So naturally, he realizes that he needs his team, so they help, and then Megazord time. Lesson learned, plot resolved, but uh-oh, here comes trouble. This episode isn't what I'd call memorable because we understand what it's going for and how it will all resolve. It struck me as a necessary plot point for the show, more so than a well-developed character hurdle for the team. And that also applies to episode 3, except without the necessary part, which exists purely to inform us that, yes, on top of being a trained ninja and now a Power Ranger, Tori is also female. Character development? But really, it's just a show biding its time because a pair of evil rangers is already on their way, which has the advantage of introducing important new characters into the fold with a very wide-spanning story backing their eventual inclusion on the team. But unfortunately, their episode 2 reveal means there's no time to properly develop the main three as characters. Although it is interesting that the 3 added rangers, who the opening narration prophecy did not tell us about, are the same ones that get 3 to 4 part episodes dedicated to what they're going through and how they eventually reconcile their own personal hangups to join the team. I'll get more into what I think that means during the character breakdown, but I'm just not sure the initial setup of Thunder Strangers is as good as it could have been. Not the episodes themselves, which have their own pros and cons, but the setup. We barely know anything about the team as is, but they already need to face down a threat that's everything they are, but evil? Antagonist rangers and evil counterparts are great, and they've made great ranger stories from them. But all the good ones have teams that go through at least some character growth long before their doppelgangers start causing havoc. That allows for the stakes of the confrontation to be heightened, because we, the audience, have more investment and knowledge regarding the people involved. But it felt like the Thunder Rangers were introduced very early on, not as a well-developed plot point, but because Evil Rangers are a franchise staple, and to move the story along as quickly as possible, which is ironic, given how relaxed the season wants to be. So the question then becomes, how much of that was intentional? That said, Thunder Strangers is a good 3-parter, and Looming Thunder was a really good way to initiate it. Having Dustin, the most trusting person on the team, develop that initial connection to the new kids on the block makes a ton of sense. And it's something that would continue to define Dustin's character even beyond this moment. In Thunder Strangers proper, they are introduced by firmly kicking the Rangers' asses, as expected. But here's the interesting part about the Thunder Rangers. Similar to Ryan Mitchell, Blake and Hunter are choosing to work for Lothor and are in full control of their actions. In line with that, they figure out the identities of the Rangers, and then Blake feigns injury to discover the entrance to Ninja Ops, which then allows both Thunder Rangers, who are strangers no more, to capture Sensei. But there's also a bit of honor still within them, as they do help the Rangers before that, specifically because Tori helped Blake and Hunter promised to return the favor. But then, Part 3 dips into Ex Machina territory, as the Thunder Rangers reveal their powerful reasoning for wanting Sensei dead. He killed their parents, which would have made for a great late-game twist or perception-shattering reveal. But instead, here's your dead parents, conveniently located at this place you're already at to tell you the whole truth. What I think would have been more interesting, give Sensei a reason to have actually killed Blake and Hunter's parents, as opposed to the obvious answer, which is also probably a clever joke, since Grant McFarlane does play both Sensei and Lothor, so getting their actions mixed up makes some sense on more of a meta level. If that's what they were going for, great, it's funny, but there's just nothing to it as is. But if Sensei had actually done it, it adds a new layer to his past, since as a former ninja himself, he must have fought someone. What if Blake and Hunter's parents were actually evil, thus explaining how their kids would know Lothor, but their sons thought they were the good ones, thus making Sensei the evil one to them, which would then necessitate a deeper conversation about ninja morality, and now all the Rangers feel conflicted, while Sensei has to work through his most difficult moment since the day he lost his brother to darkness. But Ninja Storm isn't really interested in adding complexity to the proceedings, and as I mentioned, it works to a point, but there are times when the line between lax and lazy becomes blurred as a result, and Ghost Parents resolving what could have been an excellent point of contention for all involved parties falls a hair too far on the lazy side, whether intentional or not. The trend of good but not great continues when we arrive at Return of Thunder, where the Rangers are literally mind-controlled twice into fighting themselves again. It starts off very promising, as Tori is still feeling gloomy about Blake not being around, and then, after the Thunder Rangers return, the Wind Rangers wisely debate whether or not to trust the Reformation, and from there, mind control fight, remember who you are, now it's just Hunter under control, or brother where art thou, and then everything's a-okay. But wait, there is more. Now Chubo is controlling the Wind Rangers, so now the Thunder Rangers have to save them. It's fine, it's serviceable, and Chubo might just be the best part of that entire saga, but it never aspires to be much more. But when Cam is more of the focus, this season does become considerably better. Early on, it's clear that Cam wants to do more for the cause, and in between two Thunder Ranger arcs, he takes more initiative to prove to his father that he too can be a hero. And it probably does knot him a little bit that these three Rangers, who are the antithesis of everything Cam is, were even chosen at all. Nowhere to Grow serves as a great starting point in developing the current Cam, as well as a means to understand Sensei's need to protect him prior to his journey through time, which we'll get into now. The Samurai's journey is a great three-parter, and it helps that we come in with a firm understanding of who Cam is as a character, as well as knowing about the promise Sensei made to his late wife. The time travel mechanics seem somewhat questionable, but I mean, when aren't they? Even still, it was poetic to have his power come from his mother, the one person who absolutely did not want him to take part in this life. And before that, he needed to convince that same person that he was trustworthy enough, and by extension, ready enough to wield that power and become a ranger. Oh, and Lothar is his uncle, but let's be honest, they don't really do anything with that. And that's weird, because Cam's mother is the most important thing symbolically about these episodes, both a literal and figurative representation of what Cam has to overcome prior to completing his journey. It's a very well crafted series of episodes on that end, especially part 2. And yet, that's the only time that family and the connections thereof seem to factor meaningfully into the story. Lothar is Sensei's brother, but that reveal changes next to nothing about how anyone on the team operates. It's kind of fascinating how the season begins to dig into the Watanabe clan, only to come to a screeching halt and say, yep, that's deep enough, now let's make Cam a bug for a day. But with his samurai journey now complete, Cam joins the team as the Green Ranger, and for my money, one of the best Green Rangers to ever suit up. But then, immediately after, it's back to clowning around, which I say fondly, because I Love Lothar is just hilarious. And it may or may not be a dark parody of how television and the media in general can and many times does convince hordes of people to believe literally anything they see. But let's not jump down that rabbit hole today. But there's also surprisingly good episodes like All About Beevil that focus more on Dustin and his over-eagerness to trust in the goodness of others. His instincts do end up being somewhat right in the very end, but unlike how a similar episode functioned in Jungle Fury with Camille and Lily at the center, Mara and Capri aren't nearly as complex, so their resolution feels just out of left field as Blake and Hunter's ghost parents. It just sort of happens because that's how to resolve things. But, as is the case with this season, we get some downtime and then another great set of episodes called Shane's Karma, which features the introduction of Vexacus, probably the most engaging among Lothar's band of misfits. But it's more than just a Battleizer episode, since it probably won't surprise any of you to know that the empowered suits themselves don't concern me as much as why they were earned. In this case, just like with episode 1, a major power-up is earned on the back of a selfless heroic deed, courtesy of Kid Shane. It's a rare episode for this season that has a welcome level of heightened tension and emotions, and getting the best performance out of the season from Shane. It also works as a great introduction to Vexacus himself, who proves worth fearing through action while also building up to his plans to overthrow Lothar. With him, and eventually Shimazu, working together in secret, the season presents its first bit of depth on the villain side of the story, since, again, the family ties might as well not exist. But I do think the specific ways they handle that depth was brilliant, and I also think the way Vexacus operates and is eventually taken down is a great metaphor for the season itself. And in part 2, we'll go deeper into why I think Vexacus was so uniquely valuable, as well as breaking down the main characters. But until then, thanks for watching.